The village was small, tucked away in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, where children's laughter echoed through cobbled streets, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted from tiny homes. But when war came, it swept through the valley like a storm, leaving nothing untouched. For the children of the village, their days of carefree innocence were replaced with a reality that demanded courage far beyond their years. Lena was only 12 when the first tremors of conflict reached their home. Her father, a farmer, had always reassured her that their valley was too remote to matter to the outside world. But when soldiers marched into the village, demanding supplies and taking men to fight, she saw the fear in her father's eyes. That fear turned to determination as he gathered her and her younger brother, Tomas, around the hearth one night, whispering to them that they must always look after each other, no matter what. A week later, her father was gone, conscripted into the army. The village changed overnight. The streets grew quieter, the laughter of children replaced by whispers and hurried footsteps. Lena quickly learned to adapt. She and Tomas, only 9 years old, scavenged for food in the woods when rations ran low. The forests, once a place of play, now felt like a refuge, a shield against the chaos that had taken hold of their lives. One day, while foraging near the edge of the forest, Lena and Tomas stumbled upon something that made their hearts race. A boy, not much older than Lena, was lying in the underbrush. His face was pale, his clothes torn, and blood stained the bandage on his leg. He was a soldier, or at least he had been. A child soldier, his rifle discarded nearby. Lena knew the risks of helping him. Soldiers on either side would consider it treason. But something in his hollow eyes reminded her of Tomas, scared, alone, and far too young to bear the weight of war. Lena dragged the boy to a hidden clearing deeper in the forest, Tomas helping as best as he could. They built a small shelter of branches and leaves, tending to the boy's wounds with scraps of cloth and herbs Lena had learned about from her mother. He told them his name was Mika, and he had been forced to fight in a battle he didn't understand. His unit had been ambushed, and he was the only one who escaped. Days turned into weeks, and the siblings cared for Mika in secret. They shared their meager food, hunted small game, and avoided the patrols that sometimes roamed the forest. Despite the hardships, a bond formed between the three. Mika taught Tomas how to use a slingshot to hunt better, while Lena showed Mika how to identify edible plants. In those moments, they found fragments of the childhood they had lost, laughing at Tomas's exaggerated tales of their bravery, or playing quiet games to pass the time. But the shadow of war loomed ever closer. One cold evening, as Lena returned from the village with a stolen loaf of bread, she overheard whispers of an impending attack. The soldiers believed the enemy was hiding in the forest, and planned to set it ablaze to flush them out. Her heart sank. The forest was not only their sanctuary, but now Mika's life depended on it. Lena and Tomas hurried to their hidden shelter. Mika, still weak but determined, insisted he could make it to another village if they helped him walk. It was a dangerous plan. The roads were patrolled, and the terrain was unforgiving. But staying meant certain death. That night, under the cover of darkness, the three of them began their journey, Lena and Tomas supporting Mika as he limped through the dense woods. The journey was grueling. The cold bit at their skin, and the forest, once familiar, seemed to stretch endlessly. They avoided the roads, cutting through thickets and streams to stay hidden. At one point, they heard the distant crackle of flames and knew the soldiers had begun their assault on the forest. The smell of smoke urged them forward, their steps quickening despite the exhaustion that weighed on them. As dawn broke, they reached the edge of the forest, where a narrow dirt path led to a neighboring village. They paused, catching their breath and scanning the horizon for signs of soldiers. Just as they began to feel a flicker of hope, a voice rang out. Halt! A group of armed men emerged from the trees, their uniforms unfamiliar. Mika stepped forward, shielding Lena and Tomas with his body. The men, seeing Mika's wounded state and the two frightened children, lowered their weapons slightly. They were part of a resistance group, fighting to protect the villages caught in the crossfire of the war. The leader, a grizzled man with kind eyes, listened to their story. He offered them sanctuary in the village, where others like Mika, lost and displaced by the war, had found safety. It wasn't much, he said, but it was a chance to survive. In the weeks that followed, Lena and Tomas helped in the resistance village, tending to the wounded and gathering supplies. Mika, once recovered, joined the resistance, vowing to fight not for war, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Lena watched him go, with a heavy heart, but understood his choice. She too had changed. The shy, carefree girl she had been was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had faced the worst and survived. Years later, when the war finally ended, Lena and Tomas returned to their village. It was no longer the place they remembered, but it was home. The scars of the past remained, but so did the lessons they had learned, that even in the darkest times, kindness and courage could light the way. They never forgot Mika or the others they had met during those harrowing years, proof that even in chaos, there was hope, and even in war, there was humanity. As they settled into the resistance village, Lena felt a mix of relief and unease. The air here was no longer thick with gunfire or the constant threat of discovery, but it was far from peaceful. The people were scarred, physically and emotionally. Many had lost their families, their homes, and even their hope. Lena often wondered if she and Tomas would grow up to be like them, hardened by loss and bitterness, their hearts closed to anything beyond survival. But Tomas, young as he was, refused to let the darkness consume him. While Lena busied herself with chores, learning to cook for the wounded or helping to patch clothes, Tomas found ways to make people smile. He entertained the children of the village with his stories, spinning wild tales about heroic adventures and far-off lands. To Lena, it seemed like a small miracle that even after all they had endured, Tomas still had the energy to dream. Mika, too, found his place in the resistance. Though his wounds had barely healed, he trained with the other fighters, learning to wield weapons and navigate the dense jungle surrounding the village. He was quiet, focused, but his bond with Lena and Tomas never wavered. In the evenings, he would sit with them, sharing stories of his own life before the war, a life that seemed like a distant memory now. One night, as they sat by a small fire, Mika revealed something that left Lena speechless. He had a family, far to the north. He had been separated from them when the soldiers took him, and he didn't know if they were still alive. His voice trembled as he spoke of his younger sister, who was about Tomas's age, and how he had promised to protect her. "I failed her," he said, staring into the flames. "Just like I failed everyone else." Lena placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm. "You haven't failed, Mika. You're here. You're fighting to make things right. That's more than most people can say." For a while, they sat in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the void. Tomas, ever the optimist, broke the tension with a bold declaration. "We'll find your family someday, Mika. I promise." The words hung in the air, a fragile hope in a world that had offered them so little of it. The days turned into weeks, and the resistance village became a strange kind of home. Lena and Tomas fell into a routine, one that felt almost normal despite the war raging beyond the jungle. But normalcy was fleeting. The resistance fighters often returned from missions with grim news: villages burned, families torn apart, soldiers advancing closer to their hidden refuge. One evening, Mika approached Lena with an urgent expression. "They're planning something big," he said. The resistance leaders want to strike the main supply route used by the soldiers. If we can cut it off, it'll slow their advance. Lena's heart sank. She knew what this meant. Mika would be joining the mission. She wanted to beg him to stay, to remind him that he was still recovering, but she knew it would be useless. Mika had made his choice long ago. He was determined to fight, no matter the cost. The night before the mission, Lena and Tomas stayed up with Mika, talking and laughing as if nothing were amiss. They shared stories of their childhood, of the games they used to play, and the dreams they used to have. Mika smiled, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. When dawn came, and it was time for him to leave, Lena hugged him tightly. "Come back," she whispered. "Promise me you'll come back." Mika nodded, though he said nothing. And then he was gone. The days that followed were unbearable. Lena and Tomas tried to distract themselves with work, but the silence was suffocating. Every time a fighter returned to the village, they held their breath, hoping to see Mika among them. But as the days stretched into weeks, their hope began to wane. One evening, as Lena sat alone by the edge of the village, she saw a figure emerging from the jungle. Her heart leapt, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it wasn't Mika. It was one of the resistance leaders, a grim expression on his face. "We lost many," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But Mika, he saved us. He held the line so we could retreat. He didn't make it." Lena felt the world crumble around her. She barely heard the rest of the man's words, her mind consumed by the image of Mika standing alone, facing the enemy. She wanted to scream, to cry, but no tears came. Instead, a cold, hollow anger settled in her chest. That night, she sat with Tomas, who was too young to fully grasp the weight of Mika's sacrifice. "Do you think Mika's with his family now?" Tomas asked, his voice small. Lena swallowed hard, her throat tight. I think he's at peace." In the weeks that followed, Lena threw herself into the resistance's efforts. She learned to fight, to navigate the jungle to survive. She wasn't driven by revenge. Mika wouldn't have wanted that, but by a desire to protect others, to ensure that no one else had to endure the pain she felt. Tomas, too, grew stronger, though his innocence was slowly fading. He no longer told stories of heroic adventures. Instead, he spoke of a future where they could rebuild their village, where children could play without fear. The war dragged on, but Lena and Tomas endured. They faced countless challenges, from ambushes to betrayal, but they never gave up. They carried Mika's memory with them, a reminder of the strength and kindness that had carried them through their darkest moments. Years later, when the war finally ended, Lena and Tomas returned to their village. It was a shell of what it once was, the houses reduced to rubble and the fields overgrown. But it was still home. Slowly, they began to rebuild, planting crops, repairing homes, and welcoming back those who had survived. One day, as Lena worked in the fields, she heard laughter, children's laughter. She looked up to see a group of kids playing in the meadow, their laughter echoing through the valley. For the first time in years, she smiled. The scars of the past would never fully heal, but in that moment, she saw a glimpse of the future Mika had fought for, a future where children could be children again, where hope could flourish even in the face of chaos. Lena and Tomas never forgot Mika or the others they had lost. Their names were etched into their memories, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as they worked to rebuild their lives, they carried with them the belief that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found.